There is a silence you carry that no one hears, not because it's quiet, but because it speaks a language most people were never taught to understand. You can be surrounded by voices, laughter, warmth, and still feel like you're watching life through glass. You nod, you respond, you function. But something in you stays elsewhere, alert, withdrawn, observing, and the most painful part, you don't feel broken, you feel different. You wonder why connection feels exhausting, why small talk drains you, why intimacy triggers both longing and resistance, why you crave depth, yet retreat the moment it gets close. So you tell yourself a story. I'm antisocial. I'm emotionally unavailable. I'm hard to love. But what if that story is wrong? What if this distance you feel isn't a defect, but a pattern, a psychological imprint, a survival intelligence formed long before you had words for it? Because sometimes disconnection isn't avoidance, it's memory. And if you feel disconnected from others, it may not be because you lack something, but because you developed 7 rare traits that most people will never have to develop. Unless they learned early that closeness could cost them something. Somewhere early in your life, before language formed memory, your body learned a rule the mind would only understand years later. Not a belief you chose, not a conclusion you reasoned toward, but a physiological verdict written directly into your nervous system. It learned that reaching outward did not reliably bring safety. That closeness could disappear. That comfort could be inconsistent, delayed, or come with conditions. And so your system adapted in the only way it knew how. It turned inward. Instead of crying until someone came, your body learned to quiet itself. Instead of reaching for reassurance, it learned to stabilize alone. You became your own regulator before you ever learned how to attach. This wasn't strength in the heroic sense. It was survival intelligence. Your nervous system decided that dependence carried risk, and autonomy felt safer than hope. So you learned to contain your emotions rather than express them. You learned to witness your pain rather than hand it to someone else. You learned to self-soothe, not because it felt good, but because it felt predictable. Over time, this inward regulation became your baseline. Your calm did not come from connection, it came from control. This is why you may appear composed in moments that break others. When people leave, you don't collapse. When affection fades, you don't panic. When distance appears, something in you tightens, but it does not reach. You withdraw not dramatically, but efficiently, quietly, almost invisibly. From the outside, it looks like emotional maturity. Inside, it is a nervous system executing an old protocol. You didn't stop needing connection. That part is crucial. You still long for closeness, warmth, and emotional safety. But you stopped expecting them. Expectation was the dangerous part. Expectation led to disappointment, and disappointment once felt unbearable. So your psyche learned to want without reaching, to desire without leaning. And this is where the cost begins to surface in adulthood. You are capable, functional, often admired, but when support is offered, something in you hesitates. When someone says, "You don't have to do this alone," your body doesn't relax, it braces. Leaning feels foreign, receiving feels risky. Depending, even briefly, activates an old alarm that says, what if they disappear? What if they fail? What if I'm left holding my need again? So you keep your balance alone. You stay upright by not leaning too far into anyone. You don't beg because begging once felt humiliating or useless. You don't chase because chasing once led nowhere. You learn dignity through withdrawal, strength through self-containment. But this independence is not freedom, it is protection. It is armor shaped like competence, armor shaped like self-sufficiency, armor that keeps you standing, but also keeps you separate. Because the same system that learned to calm itself alone now struggles to soften in the presence of care. It doesn't know how to surrender without scanning for threat. This doesn't mean you are incapable of love. It means love requires you to unlearn a rule your body once needed to survive. A rule that said, I can handle this myself. A rule that kept you safe once, but now keeps you distant. Your independence isn't arrogance. It isn't emotional coldness. It isn't superiority. It is a scar that learned how to function. You don't experience conversation on the surface level most people do. Words arrive, but they are never the whole message. Your attention automatically drops beneath what's being said, searching for what's being felt. You notice the hesitation before a sentence finishes, the slight tightening in a jaw, the delay before a reply, the warmth that fades a second too early. These things register in you instantly, often before you even realize you've noticed them. This isn't overthinking. It's a nervous system trained in uncertainty. At some point, probably early, emotional reality was inconsistent. People said they were fine when they weren't. Affection appeared and vanished without explanation. Anger hid behind politeness. Love was present one moment and withdrawn the next. So your psyche adapted by learning to read what wasn't being spoken. It learned that safety depended on anticipation. That awareness was protection. You became fluent in emotional subtext because misunderstanding it once had consequences. So now you read rooms the way sailors read the sea, not to control it, but to survive it. You feel when tension is building before voices rise. You sense when someone is pulling away long before they admit it. You know when warmth is genuine and when it's performative. Your body tracks emotional shifts the way others track weather changes on a screen. This depth of perception has a quiet cost. It makes surface-level interactions exhausting. Small talk feels hollow not because you lack social skill, but because you're aware of how little of the truth is being spoken. You feel the emptiness between words. You notice when conversations stay safe instead of sincere, and pretending not to notice feels like a form of self-betrayal. So you withdraw, not dramatically, subtly. You disengage emotionally while remaining present physically. People may interpret this as aloofness or detachment, but what's really happening is internal filtering. Your system is deciding whether what's being offered is emotionally congruent enough to trust. When people say one thing and feel another, your body reacts before your mind explains it. Something tightens, something cools. A quiet alert goes off. It's not judgment, it's recognition. Inconsistency once meant danger, confusion, or loss. So now, coherence matters to you at a level others may never understand. This sensitivity doesn't always feel like a gift. Sometimes it feels like isolation. You may long for simplicity, the ability to take words at face value, to not feel the emotional weight of every interaction. But your awareness won't turn off, because it was shaped by necessity. It kept you oriented when clarity was scarce. The irony is that you often crave depth while feeling disconnected from it. You want honesty, but you see how rare it is. You want presence, but you sense how often people are elsewhere, even when they're in the room. This creates a quiet loneliness, not because you're unseen, but because you see too much. And yet, this trait holds a profound truth. You are not disconnected because you lack warmth. You are disconnected because your nervous system refuses to bond with what feels emotionally false. Your awareness demands integrity. Your body seeks alignment. You don't want perfect people. You want real ones. People whose words and feelings live in the same place. People whose presence doesn't require you to stay alert. Until then, your sensitivity will continue to act as both shield and compass, protecting you from what feels unsafe and guiding you, slowly, toward what finally feels true. This is the place where honesty becomes uncomfortable, because it asks you to look at what you want, not as destiny, but as memory. The pull you feel towards certain people doesn't come from nowhere. It isn't random chemistry or bad luck. It has a shape, a pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You are drawn to intensity because intensity feels alive, it feels charged, it feels meaningful. But intensity for you is rarely stable. It comes with distance built in, a push and pull, warmth followed by withdrawal, presence that never fully arrives. This dynamic feels strangely familiar even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. This is where shadow work begins, not in judging the pattern, but in recognizing it without romanticizing it. Your desire isn't a flaw, it's a signal. It's your nervous system gravitating toward what it already knows how to navigate. Early in life, connection may have been inconsistent. Love may have required vigilance. Affection may have arrived unpredictably, forcing you to stay alert, hopeful and slightly tense all at once. That state became encoded as closeness. So now, calm connection feels foreign. Availability feels suspicious. Consistency feels dull or unsafe. But distance wrapped in charm, that feels like home. But because it's familiar. Your body confuses familiarity with safety. It says, I know this terrain. And known pain feels safer than unknown peace, because at least you know how the story usually ends. Unknown safety has no map, no reference, no emotional muscle memory. This is trauma imprinting at work. The past doesn't just live in memory. It lives in attraction. It shapes who excites you, who unsettles you, who you chase, and who you dismiss. Desire becomes a reenactment, not of pleasure, but of unfinished business. A child's longing disguised as adult chemistry. You aren't attracted to the person as they are. You're attracted to what they activate. The waiting, the hoping. The momentary relief when they turn toward you again. That relief feels like love, but it's actually the nervous system exiting a stress response. And because that relief once came after emotional absence, your body learned to crave the cycle. This is why stable connection can feel boring, while inconsistency feels electric. The electricity isn't passion, it's anxiety. It's the old emotional blueprint lighting up again, asking for resolution. And here is the painful truth: the psyche will repeat what it hasn't integrated. It will seek the same wound in different faces, hoping this time the ending will change, hoping someone will finally stay, hoping the warmth won't disappear, hoping the child part of you will finally be chosen. But repetition doesn't heal by itself. Awareness does. When you begin to see the pattern, desire slowly separates from compulsion. You start to notice when attraction feels like tension rather than safety. When longing feels like contraction rather than expansion. When chemistry feels like a familiar ache instead of a calm pull. This doesn't mean you stop wanting. It means you start choosing. Until the pattern is seen, it repeats. Until the wound is named, it hides inside desire. But once you recognize that what you crave isn't distance, but resolution, something shifts. The spell weakens. And for the first time, attraction can move from reenactment to choice. Not all intensity is intimacy, and not all longing is love. You stand just slightly outside the moment, close enough to feel it, but not fully inside it. Life happens in front of you, and you are present, attentive, even deeply affected, yet part of you is always watching, tracking, interpreting, naming what's happening as it unfolds. You don't disappear into experience the way others seem to. You hover above it, half participant, half witness. This distance isn't detachment, it's vigilance. At some point, fully being wasn't safe. Emotional expression may have led to misunderstanding, dismissal, or consequence. So your system adapted by creating an inner vantage point, an observer self whose job was to monitor, interpret, and keep you regulated. Instead of reacting, you learn to analyze. Instead of expressing, you learn to understand. This wasn't an intellectual choice, it was an emotional necessity. So now, even in moments of joy, there is awareness. Even in grief, there is commentary. You don't just feel sadness, you notice how sadness moves through your body. You don't just experience fear, you examine it, trace its origins, map its meaning. This gives you remarkable insight. You are psychologically literate in your own inner world. You can articulate emotions others can barely name. But insight without embodiment becomes a kind of cage. Because while you are busy understanding what you feel, the feeling itself never fully moves. It stays suspended, unreleased, stored. You process emotions cognitively, but not somatically. Your mind circles them, but your body holds them. This is why relief feels elusive. You know why you feel the way you do, yet the feeling remains. This observer position once kept you safe. It prevented overwhelm. It allowed you to stay composed when chaos threatened to swallow you. It gave you distance when closeness was dangerous. But over time, the distance became habitual, automatic. You don't just observe pain, you observe pleasure too. You watch happiness instead of sinking into it. You analyze connection instead of resting inside it. Others may see you as calm, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent. They may even envy your composure. But they don't see the quiet fatigue of carrying everything internally. They don't see the backlog of unexpressed emotion waiting for a space safe enough to land. You don't lack emotion. That's the misunderstanding. You carry an abundance of it. Layers of grief that were never cried out. Anger that was understood but never released. Longing that was analyzed but never voiced. Each feeling catalogued but not completed. Living as the observer means you rarely lose control. But it also means you rarely feel fully free. The nervous system remains on standby, always monitoring, never surrendering. This is why presence can feel effortful. Why relaxation doesn't come easily. Why stillness sometimes feels uncomfortable instead of peaceful. And yet, this trait holds immense potential. The observer self is not an enemy. It is a protector that never learned when it was finally safe to step back. Healing doesn't require silencing it. It requires inviting the rest of you back into the moment. It means allowing yourself to feel without narrating, to experience without dissecting, to let emotions move through the body instead of looping in the mind. This is not losing control. It's completing the emotional cycle. When the observer learns it no longer has to stand guard, something softens, experience becomes less filtered, emotion begins to move. And slowly, the distance between witnessing life and living it starts to close. You would rather be alone than unseen, and this preference didn't come from arrogance or emotional distance. It came from experience. At some point, you learned what it feels like to be physically present but emotionally overlooked, to speak and feel unheard, to belong to a group while remaining invisible inside it. That kind of loneliness leaves a mark deeper than isolation ever could. So your psyche made a quiet vow never again. This is why groups exhaust you, not because you dislike people, but because group dynamics often reward performance over presence. They ask you to flatten yourself, to skim the surface, to trade truth for harmony. Your nervous system resists this instinctively. It knows the cost of shrinking. It remembers the emptiness of being accepted only when you are diluted. Surface level bonds feel hollow to you because you sense what's missing. You feel the absence of sincerity in polite exchanges, the emotional distance hidden beneath laughter. You crave conversations that risk something, conversations that expose fear, grief, longing, contradiction. You would rather sit in silence than speak words that don't carry weight. And when depth appears, even if it hurts, you lean toward it. Because pain with meaning feels more honest than comfort without truth. This doesn't make you difficult. It makes you discerning. Your standards were shaped by a nervous system that once endured emotional emptiness and refuses to return there. Loneliness for you isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of resonance. And while this path can feel isolating, it is also an act of self-respect. You are protecting something fragile and sacred inside you, the part that knows what real connection feels like, even if it has rarely been met. When someone offers care, however, something in you tightens before it softens. The offer doesn't land cleanly, it passes through filters. Questions rise automatically. What do they want? How long will this last? What's the hidden cost? This response isn't ingratitude, it's memory. Once, care may have come with strings. Affection may have been inconsistent, transactional, or withdrawn without warning. Love may have been something you earned through usefulness, compliance, or emotional restraint. So receiving never felt neutral. It felt like a debt waiting to be collected. And your body learned to stay alert even in moments of kindness. Now, as an adult, you give easily. You show up, you listen, you support. Giving feels familiar because it keeps you in control. Receiving, on the other hand, requires vulnerability without certainty. It asks you to trust that care can exist without consequence. And that's where your system hesitates. Not because you don't want closeness, but because closeness once came with loss. So you accept help politely but don't lean into it. You downplay your needs. You feel guilty when someone does too much for you. Suspicion and gratitude coexist uncomfortably. This creates distance not from lack of desire, but from an old fear that dependence leads to disappointment. Healing here doesn't mean forcing yourself to receive more. It means slowly teaching your nervous system that care doesn't always disappear. And then there is the deepest truth, the one that reframes everything. You are not disconnected. You are unintegrated. What feels like distance is actually fragmentation. Different parts of you learn to survive in different ways. The strong one learned to endure. The quiet one learned to stay unnoticed. The watcher learned to anticipate. The self-soother learned to cope alone. Each part did its job well, too well. These parts aren't flaws to be fixed. They are adaptations that never got the chance to reunite. Shadow work isn't about erasing them. It's about bringing them into dialogue. Letting the strong one rest. Letting the quiet one speak. Letting the watcher step back. Letting the self-soother accept comfort. When you stop judging your distance, something softens. When you stop pathologizing your solitude, something opens. When you see your traits not as defects but as evidence of intelligence under pressure, shame loosens its grip. Healing doesn't begin with becoming more social or more open. It begins with becoming more whole. And when integration happens, connection changes. It no longer feels like a threat to your autonomy or a gamble with your safety. It becomes a choice, made consciously, slowly, and on your terms. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone should. You were never meant to belong everywhere. You were meant to belong deeply. You are not broken. You are patterned. And patterns, once seen with compassion, can be rewritten, not rushed, not forced, but gently, patiently, as trust returns to the body and truth returns to the heart.